Hello, good afternoon. This is the Marketplace. Coming up, we speak to UK Prime Minister's Trade Envoy, Lord Marland, on how economies can revive after COVID-19 pandemic. Also coming up, 5 years after the June 3 disaster, do you feel safe at the fuel station? What has changed at the pumps? We'll bring you more. My name is Darryl Kwao. Thanks for being with us. We've got details right after the break. Welcome back to the Marketplace, everyone. Now, countries all over the world are moving towards easing lockdown restrictions while dealing with the impact of COVID-19 pandemic, which has hit economies. And there is talk of a recession even after governments have pumped trillions of dollars into their economies and slashed interest rates. How bad will it be? And is there any recovery in sight? Questions we are going to try to get answers to from Lord Marland, who is currently the chairman of the Commonwealth Enterprise and Investment Council. Great to have you on the program this afternoon. Now, Commonwealth countries, including Ghana, have been hit by COVID-19. Tell us what you think are the long-term effects.
I think there are obviously multiple effects. This is a horrendous issue that amazingly no government has had to cope with something like this since probably the Second World War. It's going to have issues that no one really can yet fathom, but obviously the immediate ones are health, mental health, the knock-on effects from having been in isolation for so long. Then, of course, as you've mentioned, every government has sought to keep their economies afloat. This will have a huge on-cost to businesses and humans in terms of repaying that debt over a long period of time. Happily, interest rates are at an all-time low, so the ability to repay that debt and to borrow money to repay it by governments will mean that they will be able to even out this repayment over a longer period. And ultimately, there will be a huge effect on employment and business activity.
Okay, and which industries have suffered the most based on your engagement with member states of the Commonwealth, and what sectors really are finding opportunities? Well,
clearly the initial industries are hotels, restaurants, bars and pubs in the United Kingdom, tourism and travel, airlines, cruise ships, all the rest of it, of which multiple Commonwealth countries are highly dependent. So if you take the Caribbean, the Maldives, Sri Lanka, some of the smaller island states in the Pacific that make up Commonwealth countries, the impact is going to be huge in terms of tourism. South Africa, Kenya, going through many of the African tourist hotspots are going to suffer tremendously, and indeed have. I've written to the British Prime Minister asking, in fact I was the first person to write to the British Prime Minister asking him to lift this 14-day quarantine that the UK are planning on imposing, because the economic problem for that will be horrendous for these for people who need to travel and need to revive the economies of some of these smaller island states. But really, every business has been affected, probably with the exception of Zoom and some of these web chat things, and of course the distribution networks. But everyone's really been affected by it. And some, it has been immediate, where there's been a cash flow crisis, and some we haven't yet seen the effect, because the governments have tried to soften the blow of some of these businesses. So we won't really see the long-term effect until the back end of this year.
All right, let's talk about the situation here in Africa, because we have seen fewer casualties and deaths compared with other parts of the world. And is this reason why there have been less casualties and deaths? Is there any reason to it?
Well, I'm no scientist or medic, so I can't really respond to that question, other than to say I do think African governments have managed this issue extremely well. Large. Certainly Ghana has been extraordinary in the way that they've managed it, and that will enable you to, to recover much more quickly than others. And of course, we have to hope that there won't be a second wave, because if we have a second wave, that would be quite catastrophic.
And that's what we all fear, that there would not be, and we hope that there would not be a second wave of this virus pandemic. Now, so we've talked about how millions are out of work, financial markets have been rattled, and supply chains disrupted as factories around the world close. So I'm interested in knowing how Commonwealth is helping member states to get back on their feet during and after the crisis.
Well, the Commonwealth, of course, is a networking body, and it's going to be for each individual government to deal with their own crisis. Where we can help and where we are helping in our organisation, the Commonwealth Enterprise and Investment Council, is, as I said, on tourism, on helping to persuade governments that lifting the quarantine is the right thing to support these economies, particularly where a number of countries, Africa, as you say, Caribbean, have not really had it in a significant amount. The other thing we're campaigning very hard on is that if there is a vaccine, this vaccine has got to be shared amongst countries, and obviously I'm bound to say Commonwealth countries, but it can't be kept by the developing country. They've got to be a donor to the world as a whole.
Okay, and finally, to what we're really interested in, the world is poised for a recession even after governments and central banks have pumped in trillions of dollars into the economies and slashed interest rates. What do you think will be the, do you think the recession will look like? What would it take for us to recover?
Well, I hope you've got a crystal ball, because I haven't. But let us look at some of and repeat what I said earlier. Firstly, there is a massive national debt incurred by countries. How are they going to repay that? Are they going to be able to inflate their economies to reduce the debt out of it? Does inflating the economy bring higher interest rates for the man and woman on the street in terms of their borrowings? Does this mean that we move to a greater AI-based industries? Does it mean that we have mortgaged future generations to a very high tax regime? These are the questions that we will struggle with in the next few months as the effects of these begin to come into the system and governments respond to it. But I think there are positives, and we must look to the positives, and we must look at the positives of how we've all had to adapt in the last few months to this lockdown, how our businesses have changed, how the way that we've communicated in this last few months, and the productivity that still occurred despite these terrible things. And I think, obviously I've only been able to look around the UK, I see it's going to come back very quickly, the productivity. And I'm rather hoping that I'll be able to get my very long hair cut sooner rather than later, as I'm sure all of us have wanted to in isolation. But this is, let us make no mistake, this is one of the worst things that's ever happened. Well, it is arguably the worst thing that's happened in my lifetime, probably in the last century, and it'll be an extraordinary test on government's resolve, which has been tested to the limits almost so far on how globally we recover. And so organisations like ours, the Commonwealth, which is a networking organisation, which brings nations together, which has a common theme, will have to play a part, and I very much hope we will be at the forefront of that.
All right, thank you so much. We've run out of time, which we could continue. Lord Marland, you are currently the chairman of the Commonwealth Enterprise and Investment Council. I appreciate your time with us this afternoon.
Thanks very much for having me. Great to see you.
All right, so we've been talking about coronavirus and how it's biting hard on global economies. Let's talk about cocoa. Now, farmers are making a case for Ghana to create a local demand for industrial use of cocoa. Already, Chief Executive of Cocoa Board, Joseph Boyne-Edu, reveals the pandemic has disrupted global chains of cocoa, saying slowing the acquisition of the $3.5 billion cocoa syndication loan for the 2020-2021 crop season. Well, next, my colleague Charles Aite visited one of the largest cocoa farms in the eastern region and reports.
This is Kobo Farms, a 45-hectare cocoa farm at Achimtafo in the eastern region. This farm will be harvesting 160 cartons of cocoa beans this crop season. But there is a problem. The novel coronavirus has left farmers here worried about the inability of their external buyers to engage in business. Samuel Tete Kobo owns this cocoa farm. He won the 2019 International Cocoa Awards. He took me on a tour through his cocoa farm. For him, the novel coronavirus calls for an urgent relook into the creation of local markets for cocoa farmers.
This challenge is worldwide. And for me, that's why I feel hurt when I come to realize that Ghana doesn't have a proper warehouse for storage of these things. Because this could be the time where we could properly store a lot of these beans and again begin our own local processing. If we are not even going to sell the beans, let's break them down into a second grade, seed that is broken down into a second grade quality, okay? So that instead of exporting the seed that nobody is ready to buy now, we crack the seeds. We try to, roast them and make them something that can last. Nobody knows how coronavirus is going to last anyway. But if we can break them down and get them in a semi-processed form, and then we can store them, this will become so marketable going forward.
So you walk into the shop. Okay. So you talk, continue.
It is the season of, they call it a pruning season. You can see the leaves around. These are leaves that have been pruned to aid in air circulation across the cocoa farm. We get to interact more with the farmers. As you could see, they're also checking most of the things around and checking most of the leaves. We get to interact with them, especially when it is a very crucial season for them in terms of pruning and the cultivation of seeds. Busily trimming the branches of his cocoa trees, Amos, another cocoa farmer, explains the extent to which COVID-19 has disrupted his income.
Yare COVID-19 ebae na aboye hu esan se cocoa eni ejuma yeye pa na mrofo nso enu na omudi ti vese na yare ni corona ya na ebisa ye hu se ti afi impo no ebetimi ato ye cocoa ti enu na ye ai se aya adwen a ye adwen hu bebre wo yare hu ama skas kan wa eden san se semre so emre akoko ensheda eni ho na kakra na ye titi no so no ye hu ska eni ho ma omo to no omo de abeto san se aban adwe nyina wo yare hu ta ma ska ni ho ekuafo ebre.
For various cocoa farmers like that of Amos, the coronavirus is really having a toll on their line of duty. Yes, they are off-growers, but they are concerned about their livelihood, especially when the even imports of cocoa beans across the country and around the world has been somewhat stalled, especially when coronavirus has hit hard on countries that have huge thirst for cocoa beans here in Ghana.
After the plucking of cocoa pods, the beans are extracted and placed through a fermentation process.
What you see here is our drying place. This is where we normally dry the cocoa beans after we've gone through the fermentation process. And we'll briefly take you through the fermentation process. But what you see here are the drying mats, which have all been covered because there is no cocoa on them now. But anytime we finish with the fermentation process, which we are going to go through now, you come to realize that the fermentation process itself is a very technical thing that if you don't follow, you mix the good flavor of the cocoa beans. Now from there, you have the fermentation box in this way. This is our own fermentation box we've designed, but we copied this technique from the cocoa research. So when they do it, it goes through a three-phase process. The first one you see here is where you put the fresh cocoa pods that have been broken into. 2 days after that, we bring all of them into the second box. We do this so that we would be able to get an even fermentation, because if they are all grouped at one place, the top gets more, the under gets more fermented, but the top doesn't get anything better. So once you do it and you turn it after 2 days, then the top gets to the bottom and the bottom gets to the top. So once you do that, after another 2 days, which is the fourth day, you move it from this second box and turn it back into the third box. So what you are seeing here is gone through the second box, and then we are ready to take it into the third box today, this morning. This is what we'll be doing this morning. Once we finish with this, it's going to spend another 2 days in the third box, which will give us a total of 6 days. Within these 6 days, we are very sure that our fermentation is complete. So once that fermentation is complete, then we will move to the mat, the drying mats. And these are the drying mats that you see here. What you see here is the plantain leaves that they use to cover the beans so that it will give it a complete, closed environment for proper fermentation. Now, this is the mat. This is the mat. So once fermentation is complete, we've spread the mat. We spread the mat. Once the mat is spread, so in 2 days' time, which is Monday morning, they will just pick it from the third box, which has completed the fermentation, and we'll put it on the mat. Now, we don't heap the mat too loaded, otherwise the sun cannot penetrate through. And we've intentionally chosen this place because right from the morning when the sun rises, the sun is on the mat in this area, open area, throughout till about 4 when the sun is setting, so that we always are able to get complete sun the whole day, 24 hours.
With unemployment rates escalating amid COVID-19, there is high potential for cocoa farming in Ghana.
I'll think of maybe.
Sure.
I start with Samuel Tetekobo, who gave reasons why cocoa farming could be the best option for graduates.
Ghana has a lot of human capital. We can say out of this youth, about 60 or 70% are idling. But this is where we can create the environment, conducive environment for people to go into agric, and in particular cocoa farming, because it's unlike the olden days where you can plant tetekwashi and in 5-6 years before you can begin to harvest. Now with the new cocoa seedlings that is being developed, 3 years, you are ready to harvest your cocoa. But before these 3 years, you see that the plantain that you planted, you will be feeding on it and you will be getting a lot out of it. So the dear message to the youth is that venture into cocoa farming, and especially my cry to the government and cocoa board is that let's get land, let's get land banks so that we can provide the initial capital.
Plunging cocoa beans prices are not only threatening revenues, of which Ghana has already lost $1 billion in the past month and a half, but also stalling the government's current syndication process for loan facilities for the 2020 and 2021 crop season. This strains Ghana's renewed commitment to improve refinement processes and guarantee that over 50% of domestically produced cocoa beans will be processed. While difficult to estimate future import and export sales, the pandemic more broadly is continuing to disrupt global supply chains and affecting manufacturing operations around the world, a sector that contributes up to 10% of Ghana's GDP in 2018. For Joy Business, Charles Aite reporting.
And finally, this afternoon, today is exactly 5 years since Ghana experienced that terrible disaster, the fire and flood disaster. The June 3 disaster claimed the lives of 152 people when the Gore fuel station at the Kwame Nkrumah Circle here in Accra exploded. Now, we've been speaking to the Association of Oil Marketing Companies, their boss, Kwekwa Dimandria, on what we have learned since 5 years ago.
Basically, it's a 10 June disaster that we had, and it's so sad that we lost about 150 odd people. The only issue that we had on those one is that here was a situation where we had an incident. It was not properly investigated, because as at now, even 5 years from there on, we have not received a copy of the report, even to know what are the root causes were and what we need to do. We only have scattered information, like you all know, the cigarette which was put there, somebody was lighting a cigarette and put out there.
That is very interesting. Does it mean that even the oil marketing company in question hasn't been given an official report on what happened?
I don't know oil marketing in question, that's well.
Yeah.
I don't know about that one. But
the industry players?
Industry players, we don't know. Because you see, God is only one out of the 116 oil marketing companies. So if you really want some things to be done as per your recommendations, you get to the parent association, then we can disseminate and organize it. So everything that we have been doing, since that time, but we are not, we had to do certain things. You know, safety, you don't end safety. You need to continuously improve. So we look at the situation and look at what we can do. The question we have been asking is, how did the oil come to the surface of the water? You know, and it's something that we have also learned, and we are beefing up our system, and also try to institutionalize. That's what brought us about our yearly safety week. So every year, before then we're not doing that. Every year we organize safety week, which we use as a training grounds, and also get some stakeholders that we interact with. We get exhibition, everything's on safety. And we try to put it out, do some training for our people, and so that, but not understanding that every year we're supposed to do training by MPA regulations for people, but this was the time that we tried to do a lot more, especially what's happening in the world on the filling stations. We try to inculcate either in way of technology or we've been training our people.
So it means that you try to institutionalize the safety week,
exactly,
to highlight the need for 100% safety,
exactly,
across all these marketing companies.
Exactly. And this is the 50th year.
Yeah.
We're supposed to do it the third week of May every year. This is the time when this thing happened. Only this year we have not been able to do it because of the COVID restrictions. But we're trying to find a way of doing it in a way. Now that we have got some further restrictions, we may try to do that.
And may all who lost their lives continue to rest in peace. That's the Marketplace today.